Hansen said, my name is Torsten, and I am the owner of Pure Seal. We are a small insulation company based in Mentor, but we travel all over the region and work there. My presentation tonight is naturally, I suppose, going to be a little bit slanted by what I believe are the best products, which of course are the ones that we work with. But I am very open to talking about everything that's available in the market if you have specific questions about other things. So we will be talking a little bit about the theory, what goes on in a house, what is it we need to look out for. Then the practice, what are the things that you can go home and do if you want to do things yourselves and not hire a contractor. And then finally, I will be very open to questions. What is it that destroys the efficiency of a building? There are really two main things that we need to look at. If a building is full of holes, if it's leaky, in other words, it really doesn't matter how much insulation, how much R value you wrap around that leaky structure. It's almost like when you go out in the wintertime, you wear a nice thick sweater, you forget your windbreaker. You're still cold even though you're wearing a sweater. So both of these things are important. What we are trying to figure out here is which is more important. Can we ignore one or the other? The short answer is no, we can't. We need to deal with both of them. So looking at leakiness in a building. This is, to give full credit, this is a little pictogram I stole off the web. There are a million of them out there. But what it shows is what goes on in a two-story house, a typical Lakewood residence, that is pretty full of holes in the wintertime. If you read the top, you'll see that it talks about the stack effect. That's the technical term that we in the trade use to describe the movement of air inside a house. It's cold outside, you crank your furnace, you're heating the air. The warmer the air gets, the lighter it gets, the less dense it gets, it begins to rise. As that air is rising up through the house, it escapes through the gaps at the top of the house, and as that's happening, cold air gets sucked in at the bottom. This is, in effect, a giant bellows that works minute by minute to reduce the efficiency of your home. If we get a proper lid put on the house, if we seal up this barrier up here between the house and the attic, we are not just dealing with this, we are actually also impacting what's happening at the bottom of the house. If the air has nowhere to go, it's going to stay here, there'll be no vacuum, no air is going to be pulled in. So think of everything you do when you attack your house as part of a bigger whole. It's a bigger picture, so to speak. It's not just that little area. I want to insulate my attic. Well, insulating your attic impacts all of the house, not just that particular intersection. If we look at insulation, this image here is an infrared camera picture of a house on a nice cold day. If you look at the temperature listings down below, we have 4 degrees at the low side and 25 degrees at the high, with a temperature of 18 degrees right here. That's the number that you see up there. So blue is cold, red and orange are warm colors. And these are relative. So if you look at the blues, you'll see outside the house, it's about 4 degrees. So it's a pretty chilly night that this picture here was shot. Where's the heat loss in this one? Well, you'll be happy to see that we have a lot of window issues. They light up bright red, relatively speaking warm, because the house is losing a lot of heat there. But not just in the windows. Yes, the windows are the darkest colors, but if you look at all of this building envelope, everything is losing heat. The only thing that seems to be not so much losing heat is the roof. We know that there's heat under this roof because we have these warm windows up there. It's a finished third floor. My guess is that in this picture we have a nice thick layer of snow on the outside of that roof. And snow is a great insulator. If you have a foot of snow up there, you have more insulation in that roof system than most people have in their walls. So, in other words, to get this to the point where we don't have all of these temperature, these warm colors, we need to improve the insulation value of these walls. To what point? Well, if we say that we have a foot of snow up there, that's about an R20. So we need to take these walls from essentially nothing up to about an R20. If we did that, and it was nice and sealed, all of a sudden the only one who would have any business in this house would be you and not me. Because the windows would still be an issue, but the walls would be where we want them to be. That's the insulation side of it. So, what I did with this little graph here was to try to illustrate how you can't really effectively get where you want without dealing with both of these aspects. The air sealing of the house, keeping the cold air from getting in and the warm air from getting out, plus the insulation value. Now, when I say insulation, what I mean by that is the pink stuff that people put in their walls, the cellulose they put in their walls, the foam insulation they put in their walls, whatever type of material goes in there that doesn't allow heat transfer. So, if you look at this graph right here, I have two curves. What we have up at the top is what R value deals with, the insulation value, the pink fluffy stuff. If that's all we are doing and not air sealing, we are ignoring half of the problem with our house. So to get the full benefit, again, we need to air seal and we need to insulate. Why did I put this dividing line here at about 50% of the total energy loss? Because that's sort of the number that is pretty universally agreed upon in old houses. It's about a 50-50 split of being really bad. So once we have the air sealing done, we're down to talking about how much insulation should we put in there. And the one thing I want to point out with this graph is how quickly this curve drops off. What I'm showing is the R value at the bottom, and I'm showing energy loss up this axis here. The R value of 1 at this point is about the same as a sheet of plywood. A completely uninsulated wall with a half-inch sheet of plywood and some siding on the outside. That's about an R1. If you call me and say, would you please come and put some foam in the walls? If I go in and I install spray foam from an R1 to an R2, I have already reduced that conductive heat loss by half. If I take it from an R2 to an R4, I'm down another 50% of the remaining loss. I'm showing you this because it's important to remember that there is a pretty dramatic drop-off in the return on investment of adding more R value. R value is what everybody tends to focus on, but it's not the whole picture as we've seen. We need to get the house sealed up, and we need to have an appropriate level of R value of insulation. But as we increase the R value, the return on that investment gets less and less in absolute dollars. If the way this works is if you have a given loss of energy and you want to reduce it by half, well, then you have to double the R value, as we just saw. That's easy to do at the front end, but it gets increasingly difficult at the tail end. So, in other words, to have an efficient building, we need a building that's tight, and we need one that is well insulated, that has the appropriate levels of R value insulation value. I've been throwing this term out. Does everybody have an idea of what R value is? Okay, so we're good with that. Resistance to heat flow is basically what. It's just a number. Obviously, there's some underlying physics, but we'll not get into that. Okay, so we're in Lakewood. We have a housing stock of old homes, which, in the context of what I've just described, presents us with a challenge. It's a challenge because as we start tightening up these old houses, making them more insulated, we're also changing the dynamics of the building. What do I mean by that? When these houses were built, they were highly inefficient. They were inefficient either because people didn't care or they didn't know how to do a better job. It was just how they were built. The good thing about that is that buildings that are leaky, that lose a lot of heat, they are very tolerant to abuse. If you have a nice wet basement with a couple of frogs quacking about in the season, it may not be a place you want to go visit, but it doesn't hurt the house too much if the house is able to let that moisture flow through and 10 air changes per hour, whatever ventilation happens. When we start tightening that up, all of a sudden we add complications to this. As we make the buildings more efficient, we reduce their ability to tolerate those types of abuses. A Lakewood house is a really good house in this context. It's made out of materials that are very tolerant. You have real wood in your houses. The planking on the outside is 1x8 or 1x10 or 1x12 pine boards. They'll take a lot of abuse. It's old growth timber. You have lath and plaster walls. Think of what they build houses with today. They build them out of fast growth, pine, oriented strand board, what Joe Stevebrook from Building Science Corporation calls was wood. You take little strands of stuff and you glue them together and you think it's going to last. Those types of materials, the OSB, when exposed to water, is going to deteriorate to the point where it's mush in about 3 or 4 years. You could do the same to your houses and let them dry out and they'll be perfectly fine. So that's a good thing. You don't have the drywall, you don't have all those paper surfaces, so your houses are a lot more tolerant and cherish that. However, when we start tightening up the homes, we do have to keep that in mind. Going back to our little graph from before, I just put it up there because it's really a fairly easy graphic way to illustrate the three elements of a house that we as insulation contractors typically look at as individual components of your house. We talk about the attic, the walls, and the basement. Crawl spaces, if you have those. And when we approach a house, we look at each of those in isolation, of course, while realizing that they do tie together and they do impact each other. So what can you do in an attic? And when I say what can you do, I mean what can you personally do if you don't want to hire me or one of my colleagues to come out and do this work for you. These are the things you should be looking at. Again, we talked earlier about the importance of sealing up the house. In the attic, that means going up there and finding all the holes that are in the floor of the attic and getting them sealed up. And I do mean all the holes. That may sound a little AR or a lot AR, but when you add all those little holes up, all of a sudden it's a great big hole. So you are in effect leaving a couple of windows open between your house and the attic. You need to find them, you need to seal them up. Caulk and can foam, what they call great stuff at Home Depot, are great materials for that. Depending on how your attic is constructed, you need to take a look at how it's vented. Do you have gable vents? Most likely you do in an old home. If you have a finished third floor, you may have a different system. Once you have it sealed up, once you have your vent situation taken care of, you can insulate with whatever material you want to insulate. Available to you would be cellulose, fiberglass in baths, or fiberglass in loose fill, loose blown material, or rock wool. My personal preference and what we use at my company is cellulose. Cellulose is a paper-based product. It's recycled newsprint most often. And what I like about it, other than that it's cost-effective, is that it settles to a continuous, pretty dense blanket of insulation. Blown fiberglass doesn't do that. It remains very loose and fluffy, which is a bad thing when you're talking about stopping airflow. Fiberglass bats are almost impossible to install without gaps, and gaps, as we know, is an enemy of effective insulation. Rock wool is another good product, but it is not readily available to a do-it-yourselfer, and it's a little more difficult to install. We have cellulose and it works well. If you go to your local building box store, Home Depot, all those, and buy the materials there, they will lend you a machine. More cost effectively, you can go to Cleveland Lumber and buy your materials there and rent the machines on there. I don't believe they have machines, but their material cost is significantly less than what you find at Home Depot. We recommend an R value of 60 when you're doing an attic. Yes, sir?
You say R60, and yet your chart showed significant diminishing returns over 30.
Very good question. Very good question. You're asking me why do I say 60?
Yeah.
Right, okay. I say 60 for a couple of reasons. One is that with cellulose, we can achieve 60 at a very low incremental cost. When you're up there anyway doing the work, when you've done the air sealing, at least if you have a contractor doing it for you, the difference in your final cost between, say, an R40 and an R60 is going to be quite small. So why 60 other than that? Code today in new construction calls for either an R38 or an R49, depending on how, which path you choose to get to acceptance. It's squirrely. If you look at the recommendations from people who are building super insulated houses, highly efficient houses, and ask, what should my numbers be in the area where I live here in Cleveland? You will often see what they call the 5, 10, 20, 40, 60 sequence, with 5 being windows, 10 being under slab in the basement, 20 being foundation, 40 being walls, and attic being 60. So my argument is, well, if there is a benefit to taking us up to that level and we can do it for just another couple $100, why not?
Okay, but there's also the incremental last 3 or 4 inches are not necessarily going to give you the same value as the first 5 inches.
Absolutely not.
So,
Absolutely
there's a diminishing return as far as the, I'll say, quality of the material as it gets.
Well, it's not the quality of the material, it's just the physics of it. Cellulose, as I said earlier, does tend to form a fairly uniform blending, and it doesn't have the airflow through itself that you get in fiberglass. So every inch counts when you're talking cellulose. Final thing you need to do, you need to seal the hatch. If you don't, that's leaving a door open into your attic, and you don't want to do that when you just the access point. Now, you may have a walk-up attic, but in many places they'll have just a little scuttle hatch with a piece of plywood or drywall or whatever it is, and that needs to be sealed and insulated. Another option, if you hire a contractor, is to finish the insulation with spray foam. It is a significantly more costly way to do that, but it is clean, it doesn't blow about, it doesn't smell, it doesn't introduce any kind of pollution into your house.
It's not the uniform from outside from the 70s.
No. UF foams were banned, I believe, in June of 1982. The derivatives of those materials are still around and used by some of my competition, but they would not be suitable for that particular type of installation. That is a sprayed polyurethane foam, a very different material. In that case, spray applied foam is absolutely the way to go. I say that, and I fully realize that I sell it. I sell it because I believe in it. We have done hundreds of these attics, and they work extremely well. These places go from being 140 degrees on a nice summer day to being within 5 or 6 degrees of whatever the rest of the house is, even without active conditioning. It really has to be seen to be relieved. The one thing I point out down here, I say the foam must have a permeability rating of less than 1 in our climate. That's to prevent condensation, vapor flow, etc. It's a little technical detail. If you think about something like this, you should keep that in mind. Yes, sir?
Yeah, if you're foaming directly onto the wood sheathing,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And there's no airspace then.
Correct.
And how do you reduce the humidity that's going to...
The reason traditionally that we have vented roof systems
Right.
is that the materials used until spray foam became common, or at least a little more common, they were all permeable to air. And when a material is permeable to air, moving air carries moisture. So we needed a way to carry that moisture away from the roof deck to prevent condensation up there. That's the main reason that we vented in the past, to control condensation. A couple of other reasons, but that's the main one. The big difference between foam, polyurethane, spray foam, and fiberglass or cellulose or whatever is that foam is air impermeable. Air does not move through foam. And without moving air, you have no or significantly less moisture. Because moving air is the main vehicle for moving moisture. If that's the case, then why do I make a point of saying this permeability of less than 1? I'm talking here about vapor permeability. Vapor is suspended in the air, there's moisture in the air. If you have an outside and an inside of an assembly, and there's more absolute humidity on one side than on the other, there's more water in the air, they will try to equalize. Just like if you have two connected vessels with water in them, they will try to equalize, right? Some of us remember that from physics. I think there was something about that anyway. Same thing goes on here. So if we have a material that doesn't allow that transfer, we can prevent that movement up to the barrier. And with a permeability rating of less than 1, that doesn't happen. If you look at spray foam, what that means is that you cannot use open cell spray foam in a roof deck in this part of Ohio. It's too permeable. That's all. Yes?
Could you please explain the difference between open cell and closed cell
Sure.
insulation?
Sure. These terms apply to foam insulations. And typically, they are only really used about spray foam. If you go online and you research spray foam, you'll see those two terms, open cell and closed cell. What that talks about is the cell structure of the finished material. In an open cell foam, about 90% of the cells are connected. They're open to each other. In a closed cell foam, only 10% of the cells are connected to each other. Now, most people think of those as the only two options. That's really not accurate. You can have any kind of cell structure in between those two. That is completely up to the manufacturer who decides to foam. We as a company do not spray any open cell foam. We spray a lot of closed cell foam, and we spray a foam that is in between those two densities. Okay.
I have one more question.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's good.
So when you spray your third floor, for instance, and since the foam goes directly, let's just use foam as an example, it goes directly onto the wood.
Uh-huh.
What happens if you get your roof replaced and they need to replace a few boards?
Two things to that. The first one is, of course, you don't spray foam on a roof deck that is not in good shape. If the roof deck is in good shape, and you go to replace your roof, the new roof will simply go down on top of that. If there are issues, what would typically happen is that the roofing company would lay down plywood right on top of the existing planking. If you need to remove boards and replace them, you can certainly do that. With greater difficulty if it's a closed cell foam, because that's pretty tenacious. You might have to replace some insulation if that was the case. It's an issue that comes up from time to time, more as a theoretical exercise than anything practical. I haven't seen it happen in the 12 years that I've been doing this. We've never had an issue with that. But of course, theoretically, it could be a problem, for sure. If you're concerned about that, what we could do would be to staple up a surface underneath your existing roof sheathing before we spray the foam. That's certainly possible, so that the foam did not adhere directly to the wood.
Yeah, and on this diagram, on this picture, you're using cellulose on the ceiling?
No, that's a foam, that's a spray foam.
So you put some sort of sheeting on the on the top of it.
Oh, up here?
Yeah, on the seat.
No, actually, what you're seeing here, I believe, are just the collar ties. The
Okay,
foam goes all the way up to the peak. You
Oh,
just
the
can't
foam
see it.
goes all the way
You just
up.
can't see it. We almost always do that.
well then in that case, you're insulating an area that's not heated.
Correct. Correct.
So above the collar ties, you should still have cellulose or,
No, again, we take the foam insulation all the way up to the peak. So that is considered conditioned space as well. And just like, in this particular instance, we don't have that. But very often there will be knee walls here, right? Along the
Correct, yeah.
sides.
yeah.
And we still carry the insulation all the way out to the top plate of the wall. So those side attics become conditioned space also.
Okay, so the heat that's escaping from that finished attic is going up into the,
It's not escaping.
well, it's not escaping outside, but it's escaping into the area above the ceiling, above the collar ties.
You're right in the sense that you add a little bit of volume to the house compared to just having a flat ceiling. I would not typically advocate insulating the roof deck in an attic unless you are intending to use it as finished space. From time to time, we do that on new construction if people want to have heating and cooling systems up there, ductwork, etc. But if your attic is just dead space, which it really should be, if you're not finishing it for living area, then keeping the insulation down on the floor and minimizing the volume of your house certainly makes sense. The energy penalty, to address your question specifically, increasing the volume that little bit really is not there. Why is that? Because we gain on the other end. We lose a little bit in the winter, but we gain in the summer. Because
Okay, and we've got the same situation in the knee wall.
Yes.
That we would.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. What we see quite often is that ductwork is run out in those behind the knee walls or up in the crown in an environment that's completely unsuited for cold and warm air. That attic space, uninsulated attic space, is going to be easily 130, 140 degrees in the summer. And you're asking your air conditioner to deliver 55-degree air down at the end of a 70-foot long run. It's not going to happen. So by insulating the whole thing, we dramatically increase the efficiency. It's a method that came to us from Florida originally, where for obvious reasons they don't have any basements. So their mechanicals all go in the attics. And the attics, again, are very unfriendly here. They're even worse in Miami. So they started doing it down there 20 or 30 years ago, and it's now migrated up here. It's been done for decades, but it was written into the building codes in 2006 that we can do that. As long as we're using spray foam, we can go directly against the roof deck. So, moving down, we have the walls. And with walls, there's not a whole lot that you as homeowners typically would want to tackle on your own. It's a little bit of detail work, seal around the window trim to block out some of the air, and gasket your outlets so that you don't have cold air blowing out of those. If you want to go any further, you really need a professional. You can try to blow cellulose into your walls or fiberglass, but take my word for it, it's not going to work without professional equipment and experience. The materials available to you applied with non-professional equipment is going to settle and give you very unsatisfactory results. So that type of work is best done by a professional. And I included a few pictures here just to show you how we do that. First step, take off the siding, whatever it is, wood clapboards, vinyl, aluminum, steel. Drill holes through the sheathing behind it and get into the individual cavities. When all those holes are drilled, we use foam to insulate. We use a product called aircrete, which is a mineral-based foam material. And when that's done, we put everything back together again, spackle, touch up the paint, etc. I had more hair and there was less gray back when that picture was taken. Okay, continuing down to the basement. There are a couple of things that you can think about doing there. If you think back to the little picture of the house with all the arrows that I showed you when we talked about the stack effect, you noticed how all the cold air blew in down below and moved up. The main area of infiltration is what we call the rim joist, which is that small section of the system where the floor joists sit right on top of the foundation. As you see it here, we have the foundation, sill plate, the rim joist, and the floor joists going up. What people typically do when they try to insulate these is cut pieces of fiberglass and stuff them up there. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for at least two important reasons. One is that it doesn't do anything to block the airflow of cold air coming in. The other one is that it doesn't do anything to block the humidity flow from the basement out to the rim joist. Why is that important? Well, when you insulate here with fiberglass, the rim joist gets colder and the moisture from the basement goes up and hits it, and it can actually condense and freeze in the wintertime. We see that quite frequently. And water, of course, and wood don't go very well together. So what you want to do is, if you're doing it yourself, is use rigid pieces of foam. Cut them to size, or a little undersized, hold them tight against the rim joist and seal them in place with canned foam. If you want to get really sophisticated, you can go and get one of those little do-it-yourself spray foam kits. That will do the job too. Yes?
So how big of sections should you do? Should you just cut little pieces and then spray around them, or should you do longer pieces?
Well, you will have the floor joists typically every 16 inches on center.
Okay.
So each of these is going to be, give or take, 14 inches across, plus whatever the height is this one, or by whatever the height is. And the canned foam works really well for making that nice and tight. For us as professionals, this is a very inefficient way of doing it. It's way too time consuming. But if you want to tackle it yourselves, it works well. So that's a good idea. When you've done these cavities here, don't forget about the gap between the sill plate and the concrete. Get that sealed up as well with a high quality caulk. We'll do that. And finally, in crawl spaces, if you have any of those, for that, I would strongly recommend that you hire a spray foam contractor. They are very cost-effective projects, usually relatively small areas, and they have a major impact on your comfort in your home. Traditionally, crawl spaces were done as what we call vented spaces. They were considered part of the outdoors. You will often see that there are little vent grates on the sides of the foundation or the rim joist to let supposedly dry, fresh air in and ventilate the crawl space. What that means in the wintertime is that your floors are freezing cold. What it means in the summertime is that you get a lot of really humid air into that crawl space, and that's a really bad thing. So what we have learned is that it's actually better to treat that crawl space as part of the inside of the house rather than the outside. Think of them as basements for really short people. And the easiest way to do that is to use a closed cell spray foam, the high density stuff. You spray a couple of inches of that on the foundation. If need be, vapor barriers laid down first on the floor, of course. And as long as you have that crawl space connected to the basement, and or ideally you have a little heat dump in there or just some leaky ducts running through it, that crawl space is going to heat up, and that little cold dining nook that you have attached to your kitchen, all of a sudden you can enjoy it without wearing thick socks and slippers. Big difference. So that was just a quick little overview of what we run into when we are in this part of the city. We've had a couple of questions along the way here. Are there more? What are some of the issues that you specifically have in mind?
Just have a question. So my unfinished third floor attic, we want to eventually finish.
Okay.
So going from like, all we have are soffit vents. There's no other venting up there except a couple of windows.
Okay,
So no roof vent, no gables of any sort.
good.
If we went with your foam, do you need to vent
No,
other than,
no.
even if there's knee walls there, kind of blocking those soffit vents?
What happens when we do that? I can find a graphic here and show you. When we insulate the attic, we start down at the top plate of the wall, and we carry the foam all the way up to the peak and down the other side. So there is no vent. Introducing a vent system here would be like leaving a window open
Right.
year round. So that is not a concern.
Okay.
And I'm actually always happy when I see places or houses that don't have vented soffits, because it makes my life a lot easier. I don't have to worry about blowing foam out on the wall.
Right. And so so in the whole scheme of this, I mean, my attic is pretty open right now. It's like that picture, letting everything out.
Right.
So in the whole system of basement up, am I now pulling stuff up and track? I mean, I have to put effort into the basement too then.
I'm glad you bring that up. I probably didn't emphasize enough how important it is to think of what's going on in your basement before you really start tightening up the house. As we tighten the house, we trap anything that is in that basement. So if your basement is wet, you need to deal with that. I've seen homes where I have simply said, Mr. Homeowner, I'm so glad you called. I'm not going to do a thing on your house before you fix this and this in your basement. You are not going to be sucking anything up. As a matter of fact, when you seal this off, you are dramatically reducing this whole effect. Because without air escaping, you are blocking that flow. The flow happens because there's a vacuum. Right? Nature abhors a vacuum, so it wants to fill it. So in that sense, it alleviates part of the problem, but you want to get to the source of the basement and get that taken care of. Yes, Hansen?
So, I've always heard venting. We need to vent our attics. We need to vent for the life of our shingles.
The roofers.
So how does that all kind of go together, and will that void a warranty that I may have on my shingles because the venting isn't working?
Whether it voids a warranty or not depends on whose shingles you have. From time to time, I either send an email or pick up the phone and call and ask these guys, because it's a moving target. Last time I did that, Owens Corning, who is the largest manufacturer of fiberglass insulation in the country, said, "Oh, no, you have to vent it." So, okay. Then I called GAFL, who's the second one, and I called Certainteed, who's the third, and those two companies said, as long as you're using an air impermeable insulation, that means spray foam. We don't care, that's fine. This whole thing about the shingles, the thought process is that if you're not venting underneath the roof deck, the shingles are going to get a lot hotter, and when they're hotter, they don't last as long. Right? It's one of those intuitive rules we have in construction that makes sense to everybody, and therefore everybody accepts it. Well, when the engineers started measuring this stuff, what they found was that the difference in shingle temperature between a vented and a non-vented system was between 5 and 8 degrees max, typically 3 to 5. That's so little that it makes absolutely no difference. You may lose a year's worth of theoretical life on a 30-year shingle. It's much more important where in the country that shingle resides, what side of the house it's on, and what color it is before the temperatures. On a roof deck, you're talking 160 degrees easy when the sun's baking down on that. So it's a very small difference. We had a customer who had us do half his roof, and he told me subsequently, and he was an engineering type. He was really into this stuff. And he went up and did his own measurements. And he said that the largest difference he ever saw, he had these sensors mounted over a period of time, was about 3 degrees. So that's completely measured. The only reason I would say that I would consider venting a roof system in this part of the country would be to cut down on potential snow melt in the wintertime and reduce my risk of ice damping. When we insulate a roof deck, it is not feasible to achieve the levels of insulation that we have to get to be able to completely guarantee that there will never ever be any snow melt. That number happens to be about the R60 that we talked about. And R60 is a lot of spray foam, and that would be a very, very expensive roof. It would also have to be pretty deep to achieve something that really is a non-issue. But if you are concerned about that, having what we call a cold roof with an additional venting system on the outside, it can certainly be done. Yeah.
Could you please talk about how insulating a brick home differs than insulating a wooden
Sure.
home?
I can do that. As far as the attic and the basement / crawl spaces are concerned, there's no difference. As far as the walls are concerned, we have to define what we mean when we say brick home. Because there are different types of brick home. If you go to the east side and visit some of the old mansions in Cleveland Heights or Shaker Heights or whatever, they are probably going to be 3 layers of brick, a solid masonry wall. More common is what we call a brick on frame, which would be the same traditional wood frame that we see on most of the houses in Lakewood, with an exterior layer of brick, just one brick thickness. In between that brick and the wood framing is an air gap. When we insulate those Since we can do it in one of two ways. We can work from the outside, or we can work from the inside. And again, I'm talking about the walls. If we're working from the outside, we drill a number of smaller holes through the mortar joints between the bricks. Span the gap and drill through the planking into the framed cavity. That's what we insulate. So the end result is pretty much the same. The process is just somewhat more time consuming. It is very, very important that you do not fill that gap between the brick and the wood frame. But other than that, it's just a matter of time to get it done.
Is that with foam,
Yes.
not cellulose?
No. If you want to do cellulose in a brick home, you have to work from the inside. If you want to work from the outside, the contractor will have to remove bricks. The reason for that is that to do cellulose properly, you do what's known as a dense pack process, where you run the feed hose into the cavity. It's about 1.5 inches, fairly stiff piece of plastic pipe. You run that inside the cavity, and you use the air pressure of the machine to sort of tamp down the material, if you like. So you install it to a pretty high density, about 3 pounds per cubic foot, something like that. You can't do that with a thin nozzle that you run through a hole. When we do it with foam, we typically drill 3 holes per cavity, low, mid, and high. And we start at the bottom, and the pressure feed in the cavity as the foam flows up, we move up to the next hole. It's an easier process in that sense than cellulose would be. So cellulose guy would usually have to go on the inside and draw a bigger hole, which is then plugged and finished.
All right. Well, thank you, Torsten. That's more than I ever realized there was to know about insulation.
Oh, let me scratch the surface.
Yeah.
I'm really keeping myself in check tonight.
So, I like the picture you started with, and yeah, what we offer is a product that you can use to insulate the windows that you have instead of replacing it. What people hear all the time is if you're drafty, you've got drafty windows, you want to replace it, put in new windows. Well, my partner Ron and I, our experience has been over the past 35 years, we've done everything from installing windows to repairing windows, to working with factory service representatives, and the biggest complaint we got in the wintertime with new windows is my windows are still cold. I replaced them to be warmer, but I'm still cold, and it really didn't have a lot to do with the quality of the windows. It was the fact that they were windows, and you saw from that picture. They're made out of glass, they're about as thick as your wall. So if you think that you're going to replace them with brand XYZ and you can run around without a shirt on in the winter, that's not going to happen. It was explained to us with one of our first customers, turned out to be an engineer, and was looking for a way to put a panel on the inside of his windows for years. He had wood double bunks. And he knew the science behind it because he majored in thermodynamics and engineering. So he wrote us a nice letter explaining to us why it worked. We knew intuitively, the data is there over the years for inside storm windows work efficiently. The problem has always been, can you put a panel on there conveniently? Can you, one that you can take off and put on when you need to so you can get ventilation? And there's been various attempts to do that over the years with magnets and with screws and with plexiglass, and none of them really work out all that well. So we were trying to design a panel that would fit most situations. Unfortunately, not in swinging casements, but they work well on most types of windows wherever there's space. And the way he put it was that in the wintertime, pretty much all the time, your body's radiating 98 degrees of heat. You come up against the window, it doesn't bounce it back to you. You feel cold because it's just taking heat away from you. So it's exaggerated because it's glass, because it doesn't have that insulating value. So aside from the air leakage that you can get, draft stopping that you need to do on windows, These things, actually, just being glass without any draft, whether it's perfectly sealed, would feel cold to you because of the convection, because it's pulling heat away from your body. So we developed this panel that we think works, we know it works really well, but we tried to make it as convenient as possible. So it's a hardwood frame, it's a lightweight 16 mil vinyl. So it's safe, it's not glass or plexiglass. They use this for windows on canvas bridges and yachts and things. So it's meant to hold up to UV light, assault spray and all that on the inside, and it works just great. Then we developed this weather strip that is a dual fin seal that goes around the outside. It allows us to measure an opening exactly and just make a panel to fit, just like that. Just pop in with no kind of clips or screws or nothing permanent. It comes out just as easily then when you want ventilation. So in adding this now, you're sealing over wherever, if you've got a double hung, you've got potential for drafts there. You might have rope and weights, and a lot of the older homes in Lakewood will have pulleys up there. You're stopping that draft just by sealing that all off. And you're adding another layer in front of everything that's actually this vinyl material, which is warmer material than glass. You're using the air in between there to insulate. You're trapping a dead airspace. And you're increasing the dew point so that you don't have as much condensation. So the idea of putting them on the inside, aside from being more convenient, you don't have to go outside and get a ladder to change them, is that you can seal it more completely across the inside than you ever can on the outside. Next to your storm window, you have to allow ventilation. You have to actually, after you put it in, you have to have weep holes for rain to get out and for air to circulate so that you don't trap the moisture that leaks through your primary window. So by putting it on the inside, you can eliminate all this. We can make this as tight as feasible, as tight as we can, without having to have ventilation holes in there. So it is custom made for each window, and it does fit everything from double hungs to outswing casements to, again, we've got 35 years in the window business, so we've tried to design this to fit as many applications as possible. The frame itself is only 3/4 of an inch thick, so it will go up behind your window treatments, mini blinds, whatever. And the steel on the edge needs only about 1/2 inch to seal, so it can actually go on the edge of moldings. If you have a 1x or a 5/4 molding, it'll seal against that edge there. And if you do the other suggestions of caulking around windows and doors to eliminate the drafts, you've got a way now to seal the windows as well.
How large can you make those?
Our vinyl is limited to 54 inches at this point, so we can make them 54 inches by 200 feet, or 200 feet by 54 inches. We can also then combine these panels. We can gang them together. They'll mate with each other. So if we've got a wider opening, we can put 4 or 5 panels in it. We can also put a stretcher bar in there that would line up with any natural divisions or mullions that you might have. So we can pretty much cover any size window, with the caveat that you end up with a little molded bar in there. But we do make it a molded hardwood so that we try to enhance the look of it. We just got sick of the plain aluminum and light bulky vinyl things, so we tried to add some kind of style to it that would go with older homes and also enhance newer homes.